everybody, it's me again. I just wanted to make another video that I'm back at Lackland about my recap of Keesler BMT and everything that kind of happened and I went through with. So I was at Keesler from about 29 May to the 20th of September. Um, I was originally supposed to be there till the 6th of November, but due to my personal reason that I spoke about in another video, that's the reason why I ended up coming back earlier. I put on Staff Sergeant the 1st of May. So being a brand new staff, being now a new tier in NCO, I had a lot of motivation, and I still have a lot of motivation so that I could go kind of spread my wings and kind of be more independent. So I basically begged my leadership to let me go, and they ended up agreeing to it. So I was sent out there with myself, a master sergeant, and another staff sergeant that ended up joining us about a month later. I left about 5:30 on that Friday, and I arrived around 1500 later that afternoon. The hotel that we were put in was a hotel right on the beach in Biloxi, Mississippi. Because there were so many of us, that's the reason why we ended up getting put into that hotel, because overall I believe there was about over 100 of us. That's not to just include the BMT personnel like myself and the MTIs, but that also includes the LRS and the medical personnel that was also stationed there. So there were people from Luke, from Lackland. I met somebody from Langley over there. So it was a big pot of us, and it was pretty awesome just to get to know everybody and get to know their stories. When I first arrived there, their rooms were not ready. The actual rooms that we were supposed to be put in wasn't ready, so I just got put into a temporary room. Luckily, I was still on the same floor when they moved me about 2 days later, so I didn't have to worry about going in an elevator, traveling back and forth. All I could do is just pack up all my stuff very quickly, move it into the new room. Our room was almost like a one-bedroom apartment. So it had a full-size fridge, it had a stove, an oven, a microwave, a sink, a dishwasher. However, it did not have washer and dryers in there. We were expected to do our laundry in the hotel laundry where they wash basically everything else. Unfortunately, it was always crowded because there was so many of us in the hotel, but luckily I had a friend who is still one of my best friends from Korea. She was stationed at Keesler at the time when I was over there, and because she was pregnant and she had her other little girl, I was able to come over, come help with anything that she needed and just spend time with her, since I hadn't seen her in about 3, almost 4 years at that point. The first thing that I wrote down about happened was Tropical Storm Cristobal. It happened about the second or the third week in June. It was just a tropical storm. It was just a lot of rain. Because at Lackland, we don't have a lot of rain, and especially in the San Antonio area, because we're not near the ocean, unlike maybe Corpus Christi or Houston is. It was definitely different. I didn't have any rain gear, so it was just constantly pouring and raining, and my ABUs was just constantly soaked since I don't have an apex. It was a lot of high tides, just seen from where the beach was and the view from my balcony personally. The roads did get flooded. I remember that I was trying to drive over to D'Aberville, which is just across the bridge, and I remember I was driving on the main road and seeing the not the whole road flooded, but a good big part of it, and that was my first time really seeing roads flooded, besides maybe the 3 times a year it happens in San Antonio, of course. So that was pretty interesting. I also remember hearing storm chasers flying back and forth right next to our hotel for, I don't know, it felt like hours. But I remember they kept us up, and it was just the most awful night of sleep that I probably ever got. So there was 3 main flights and then the medical flight, which is kind of their own thing. So Alpha flight was consisted of the MTIs and the main leadership. So the MTIs who are on the line, as we call it. So those are the MTIs that are pushing out flights every single week. So those are your MTIs that you get to see with the trainees that are marching the trainees that go with them to all their appointments, dropping them off, picking them up. Bravo flight was consisted of the other MTIs who was Westmiss instructors, so class instructors, the ones that taught classes. They were also the ones that had the Beast cadres who ended up going to Camp Shelby, which was about an hour north of us. So I saw them for maybe a couple of days, and when they left, I never saw half of those MTIs ever again. LRS was also part of Bravo Flight because they had to help us transfer the trainees back and forth between Camp Shelby and us, and especially from the airport when we did pickups. Charlie Flight was the flight that I was put into. So those were the personnelists. So it was about me, my master sergeant, our staff sergeant, who worked in sensitive skills, security support, and classifications. So more behind the scenes of what we deal with the trainees than being on the line of how the MTIs are. We also had RLT. RLT was a flight chief, I believe. It was her and I believe 5 other personnelists. So those were the people that made ID cards, that checked records. So the normal stuff that we don't personally do in BMT. Also, there was a bunch of medical personnel that was also there because medical is usually their other part. Um, like I was saying, medical was part of their own kind of flights with their own group. Medical ended up consisting of BAS, so that's almost like mental health for trainees. Not all the time does trainees go there for mental health reasons. Sometimes they can go there just to see if records need to be updated, if they took care of us, they took care of the tech schoolers, they took care of the trainees. So I'm very thankful for all the medical staff and the IDMTs that were also present there with us. They were a big help to us figuring out, does this trainee need to be in? Do they need to be out? What can we do for this trainee if they get sick? Because the reason why we started it was to kind of help off balance the COVID, because in Lackland, when someone got put into quarantine, unfortunately usually the whole flight got into put in quarantine, so that's a whole flight out for about 10 to 14 days. At Keesler, we ended up only having anywhere from usually about 1 to 3 people in quarantine because they were roommates, so it was 3 to a room, just because that was the only space we had with the base that we were working in and with the area that we got to work in. There was one flight, it was the very last flight. A whole flight did go into quarantine because of 13 of them, I think, ended up popping positive. So that was pretty interesting, I thought, within itself. One of the personnel in my flight actually did pop positive about maybe a month already into our TDY. So Charlie flight, or as we were always called, the cursed flight, we got put into quarantine. It was only about maybe 5-6 days at the most. So we ended up going to get tested, all of us, at the hospital later that afternoon, that evening. We got the call saying, hey, you're negative, you can go back to work tomorrow, which was pretty nice. Quarantine was okay, but spending it in your hotel room by yourself with nobody else there, it wasn't that much fun, especially when you know you are either not negative, you aren't having any symptoms, and there just wasn't much to do. Another thing that I did was CQ shifts. So CQ shifts are those shifts that the MTIs sometimes pull, where they sit at the CQ and they check in and out trainees for appointments. I would answer phone calls. Sometimes I'd have to make announcements over the speaker, whether it was for weather warnings like lightning within 5, or maybe somebody was looking for a MTI, or maybe someone was looking for a medical person, or maybe somebody was looking for one of us because they had a question about a trainee that's like, oh, trainee so and so is wondering about this, about their top secret clearance. What can I do for it? So it was easy, but it was 8-hour shifts. And sometimes, unfortunately, if not everybody was around the CQ area and you just sat there by yourself, it did get a little bit boring, but I still had fun nonetheless. I counted all the flights that came through. It was about 17 flights who ended up coming through. There were two MTIs per flight. So basically a morning one and then an evening one. They have to do turnover just to be like, hey, here who is out on appointment. Here's what's going on with this trainee. Here's what's going on that trainee. And with the MTIs, they usually decided who would be mornings and who would be evenings. So mornings usually did PT with them and woke them up. The afternoon, evening MTIs always ended up putting them to bed. Our BMT was only about 5 weeks long, and Beast ended up taking about 2 of those weeks. So you would get in about Tuesday evening or Wednesday evening. Then 0 week and first week would be your ROM status. So that would be restriction of movement. So they were allowed to go places, but very rarely, and they're very rarely allowed to interact with certain personnel because you're still in your quarantine phase or your ROM phase, as we would call it. And then as soon as your second week hits, that's when a lot more processing can happen with the personnelists and then with us as security support and sensitive skills. And then after that, 2 weeks of beast, you came back and then you graduated. I definitely had my favorite flights within the 17 flights that I had. The flights that were my favorites, I usually ended up telling them if they were my favorite. I had favorite flights for the males, I had favorite flights for the females. My favorite flights always depended on how well the personality of the flight was, of how good I felt like the teamwork was. Of course, I have favorite MTIs, and that kind of contributed to certain flights being my favorite because just being closer with the MTIs, the trainees within the flight, I just felt like had more of a connection with us and security support and sensitive skills. But nonetheless, I still had a great time with most of the flights, and especially with my favorite flights that I just enjoyed the most. With another awesome thing that we were able to do is there was a thing called a wings panel. So the wings stands for Women Inspiring the Next Generations. One of the MTIs, a master sergeant, she wasn't the founder, but she, I believe, is one of the co-founders that started all of the wings back at Lackland. So basically what happened, it was a panel of myself and maybe 7, 8 other women, and we were just asked questions. We talked in front of a bunch of female trainees and tech scholars and some permanent party members. And we just basically talked about how it is to be a woman to serve in the Air Force. How is it to be a woman to serve in the armed services? Because there are differences of how men and women are treated. Unfortunately, not everyone understands that, or not everybody sees that. And not everyone even gets to experience it, which is luckily not all leadership is too bad. But I know there is a lot of women out there that have been sharing their stories, I feel more as lately, of how maybe they've been mistreated from a male leadership or something like that. I know there's a big Facebook group about it, and it's such an awesome Facebook group because you get to see women from all over, from different branches, different areas of life, retired, and people who are still in guard and reserve, that just women are uplifting to each other instead of putting each other down, and that's one of the best things that you could ever see. We also did another big thing, which was one of my biggest projects. It was a mural. So the old commander before the new commander ended up getting in, he wanted a mural over one of the walls, basically saying, hey, here is just who we are as Detachment 5 from the 737 TRIS. We were phoenixes, so what I did is we got chalkboard paint and we ended up writing like top male sit-ups and top male push-ups, and the same for the females, maybe top academic flight, whoever got the highest EOC scores. I also ended up painting a blue diamond and a phoenix in the middle of it, just to represent the phoenix rising from the ashes, because I believe our motto for Det 5 was rise against all odds. There was an airman there, Unfortunately, she is separated now, but she was one of the biggest helps that I had on that mural. We wanted to paint the pillars with flames. I also really wanted to honor everybody and put everybody's name up on the little ledges of the walls at the top of the ceiling of everyone who was there originally to help restart this whole program from the ground up. The medical wall was also painted with the current Air Force logo and with Arnold Hapwings, just talking about never quit, don't ever give up. And that airman really was a big help when I wasn't there or when I couldn't come in because of a hurricane or something weird like that. She was there able to help out. There was another NCO that ended up helping me out a lot as well, and then a senior NCO that helped us a lot as well. And I'm so very thankful for those three helping me out to get the mural finished on time, because without them, I definitely wouldn't have gone time. So thank you for you three that you know who you are. Like I said, I ended up leaving in September, not in November, because due to my personal reason that I spoke about in my last video. But like I said, everything happens for a reason. I've come to understand why they sent me back early, not just for the personal reason. But I am actually pretty glad that I did get sent back when I did, because of personal reasons, and I'm much happier where I see myself right now. And if I knew what I knew now, if I knew what back then myself back then, I think would have understand the reason why I got sent back early and that everything was going to be okay in the end. My main jobs and task over there was sensitive skill security support, so things I've already spoke about on my channel earlier. My other big thing was doing orders briefings, so talking about how to update your dream sheet, how to see what bases that you are qualified to go to as a 3 level. We talked about tech school information. We talked a little about Exodus. Exodus right now is still kind of tricky, unfortunately, with COVID. So I would personally get with your MTLs of wherever you are, at whichever tech school you're at, and they should be able to explain how that particular tech school is working Exodus, whether it's only a local Exodus, whether it's fully canceled, or however the MTLs are handling it. I plan to make another video about a little bit more in depth with orders, how to update dream sheets with AMS. I really like to learn how to edit videos so I can kind of share my screens and share screenshots of showing y'all of the kind of step-by-step. It's more for people who is already in, not the people who are joining just because you need your CAT cards, your government ID white CAT card, and you will need access to the Air Force portal and other systems within that. Airport pickups was another big thing I did. So Tuesday and Wednesday nights, just basically going to the airport, picking up 0-night trainees, being able to help bus them back, getting them in process, watching the MTIs do what they do on 0-night, of how much they work their butts off. And it's truly amazing. I got to shadow the MTIs when I wasn't doing anything, so I got to follow around the MTIs. I was able to march a flight, actually. It was only 20 feet, but it was still a really awesome experience. I got to narrate parade practices and actual ceremonies for some of the flights, and that was amazing within itself. I led PT for one of the flights that was graduating that week. It was my first time ever doing something like that, so it definitely put me out of my comfort zone. But sometimes getting put out of your comfort zone is really good for you. It's really good for just getting yourself out of your shell and getting uncomfortable, so then when you get put into another situation like that, it's not always that bad. I learned kind of the cadence of voice inflection of saying like right haze, or just drill movements, and I'm so very thankful for all the MTIs that ended up letting me shadow their classes or watching them march their flights, or letting me come to the DFAC with them and just getting to watch and see what they do as MTIs, a little bit more behind the scenes that I am to get through. The last thing that I kind of wrote down was about Hurricane Sally. So Hurricane Sally ended up happening about the third week of September. It was the last week that I was there. Um, because Hurricane Sally was originally supposed to hit us and not go towards Alabama, which ended up diverting almost at the last second. Um, we ended up living in the squadron, so about 2 to 3 days, all the MTIs, all the BMT personnel, unless you decided you're not coming into work, but for continuity reasons, some of us actually ended up staying, like how most of the MTIs have to stay because they had flights there that they had to take care of. It almost felt like a giant sleepover with just all the MTIs and with all the medical staff that was able to stay, just because I had grown so close to many of them. A lot of them ended up becoming whether mentors or just friends or just people I looked up to. Um, I'm very, very thankful for everybody that I got to meet over there. I'm still very thankful for all of them. I keep in contact with some of the other well, medical personnel, or with the MTIs definitely nowadays, and I'm very thankful for all of them. So thank you for Det 5 for everything that you've done. Thank you for the leadership over there, for Alpha Bravo, Charlie Flight, Medical Flight, for being my military family on my very first TDY. And other than that, that's all. Thank you. Bye.